Hi, good afternoon people. Today I would like to finally get around to doing the video that I've long promised about my saddle on my bike. Um, Earlier on in the year, I'll put a link back to the video where I mentioned it, I'd mentioned that I'd changed my saddle. And I said I was going to update you as to how I was getting on with that, and I'd also got a bit of a creak in my seat post at the time as well, so I promised I would let you know how I got on with that and how I fixed that, if I fixed it, which I did. So I'll just give you a bit of a background really as to how the saddle has kind of evolved. I'm actually on my third saddle now, and I'm pleased to say so far I'm getting on quite well with it. But I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of the backstory as to what I started with and how that progressed as things went on. So when I first got my Ribble bike, I've had it just over 2 years now. The saddle that came with it, or that I chose to come with it, was the Selle Italia X1 Flow. The saddle, in fact, is actually now on Mark's bike, which I'll explain a bit more in a moment. But this is the saddle, and I kind of really wish that Ribble had perhaps mentioned it to me at the time, really, when I was ordering the bike. I knew nothing about bikes at the time. I believe that there's a ladies' version of this particular saddle, and I assumed because I was buying a ladies' bike from Ribble that they would have given me the ladies' saddle, but it turns out they didn't. I got the male version, and obviously, you know, there are female and male saddles because, you know, our anatomy is different, and I think, you know, they're different for good reason. But I was new to the whole thing. I didn't really know whether I was going to take to cycling, so and I wasn't really doing long miles at that point, so I got on okay with it, to be honest. It was okay for probably 20 odd miles. Certainly for me, sitting in it for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I certainly noticed as I started to clock up the miles, however, especially last year. You know, we were doing sort of 100k's and being in the saddle for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, that the saddle obviously wasn't cut out, and I thought at first that it was the bib shorts that I was using, and I was investing in more and more and more expensive bib shorts, and that did help to some extent, but it certainly wasn't the golden bullet. So earlier this year I decided that I would try a different saddle. Now, I am a sucker for a deal, and I am a sucker for pretty things, unfortunately. So this particular saddle is the Kappa Space, Prologo Kappa Space. I bought it from Wiggle for, I think it was about 50 quid. It might have been a little bit cheaper than that because, as I say, it was on a deal. But I saw it, and although I went shopping for a lady-specific saddle, the write-up on Wiggle claimed it to be a unisex saddle. Now I've since been told there's probably no such thing, but I read some of the reviews, and there seem to be reviews from men and from women who seem to get on with it. So I thought it looked quite nice, there was quite a good deal on, and I would give it a go. So I put that on, and it certainly did make a bit of a difference. It certainly was better than the saddle that I'd previously got on there, the Selle Italia. But I soon discovered that it would probably only get me 30 miles before I would start getting some saddle discomfort. But I happened to be standing in my local bike shop, Elmy Cycles, chatting to one of the lady members of staff in there, Jo, and talking to her about my saddle woes, and she said basically that she felt confident she could get me in a saddle that was as near as, damn it, pretty comfortable, you know. So off I went, came back one day with my bike, and she popped my bike on a turbo trainer and got me set up, and basically ended up with the saddle that I've got on there now. which I've stuck with the same brand for now, is the Prologo, and you're probably not going to see that because it's embossed in the writing there. It's the Kappa Dea 2. Again, it's got the cutout. Actually feels really, really nice. This sort of matte finish along with the glossy finish, I really, really like. It's got the Prologo badge at the back there. It's got sort of fairly firm padding, but this is a lady specific saddle. I noticed the moment I sat on it, you know, the difference. Again, I would say I do still get some saddle discomfort, but I'm probably in the saddle for at least 3 hours before that kind of starts to happen, and when I do get it, it's just, I think it's just from the fact that I've just been sitting on a seat for that amount of time. The moment that I get off, I don't have any issues. I've certainly not had any saddle sores since then, so that seems to have definitely done the trick. I think it was a bit more expensive. It was £60, I think, and I've got a feeling it was still quite a new one. When did I put that on there? Must have been around April, May time. So I've had 4 months with it now, and yeah, I'm really, really happy with it. I would say that obviously saddles are very individual, you know, we're all very different, and even though, you know, women and men are obviously different, obviously, but I think within those categories as well, you know, different men are different women are different, so what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for the next woman, and what works for Mark isn't necessarily going to work for the next man. And I will just mention, as I said earlier, Mark has now got my old saddle on there. When he bought his bike, he bought his Giant Defy. He bought his bike second hand from a guy who was moving and didn't have much space, and was basically, it was the sale of the century, frankly, we couldn't turn it down. So he bought his bike, and with it came, I think it's just it's the standard Giant saddle that probably comes as standard with the bike, and again it looks quite nice, but Mark was having the same problems as well, and again thought maybe it was his bib shorts, so he upgraded some bib shorts, and that didn't really make any difference. We did originally put the Kappa Space on, and again he found a slight benefit but not a massive amount, so then yeah, we popped the Selle Italia on, and he loves it. He gets on really, really well with it, so it just goes to show, you know, that as I say, we're all different, and you kind of almost need to just do it by feel and trial and error, really. The creaky seat post happened just after this new saddle was put on. I remember it was coming up to my first triathlon, and I was out on a train ride, and I kept hearing this really weird creaking sound, and I thought at first it was my pedals. It seemed to coincide with my right leg pushing down, and after wiggling all sorts of things on the bike, we finally discovered that by flexing this saddle, the side of the saddle here, well, not flexing it, but pushing weight down on one side, was making the noise happen. So we came to the conclusion, Mark and I, that the problem had to be either somewhere in the saddle fitting here or in the seat post. And I did a bit of Googling and a bit of YouTubing, and found a video that suggested that the first port of call was to clean out the tube within the seat post sits within. So what I did is I obviously loosened the seat clamp and took the I'm not going to take the seat post out now because, well, frankly, I don't want to mess up my measurements and stuff. Everything's working okay now. If it's not broke, don't fix it, hey. But yeah, I basically took my post out, and there was a little bit of gunk and grit and stuff that had got obviously in the post. So I cleaned down the seat post, cleaned it right off. Yeah, re-greased the seat post. Just if you're interested, this is the grease that I use, White Lightning, and I've used that for everything that needs greasing on the bike, to be honest, and that's done me pretty well. I think I bought that from Wiggle. I can't remember how much it was, but I think it was only a few pounds. So yeah, gave the seat post a real good grease, put it back in the bike, and probably the first ride was okay. I think it was the second or third ride after that the creak started coming back again, and I think that was then the video that I mentioned that the creak had come back. I was getting a bit frustrated with it, because I felt then that the problem could actually be where the saddle fits onto the top of the seat post there, in there, and so that I would have to undo that and clean all that out. But I thought I'd give it another go. So what I did is I took the seat post back out again, cleaned it all off, and then got this brush that I use to, it's really handy when you're washing the bikes. It gets in all of the nooks and crannies and stuff like that really easily, and coincidentally was the right size to shove down there. So took the seat post out, cleaned that all off, got this into the post, into the tube, and kind of gave that a really good clean, and I managed to get quite a lot more grit and stuff out. So gave that a really good clean, re-greased the post again, put it all back together, and fingers crossed that's completely solved the problem. So that was the creak, and that's how I solved it. Probably the last thing to mention is that when I went for the saddle fit, it sort of turned into a little bit of a bike fit. It wasn't a proper bike fit because stupid me didn't realise I would have to take my bike shoes with me. Just didn't think that through, so I didn't have my bike shoes with me. And the first thing that Joe noticed when I sat on the bike before we tried any different saddles is that I was sitting right back on the back of the saddle, and she asked me why, and I just assumed that was because that was more comfortable to sit there on my bum, obviously because the saddle was uncomfortable, and I think there probably was some of that, but she thought as well that actually the reason I was doing that is because I hadn't got enough space, my bike's going to keep falling over, enough space between here and here. We got talking about the frame, and because I've got a 44 centimetre frame, now what that means basically, that's how frames are measured and sized, and depending on your height etc. Determines what frame size you need, obviously. And I think frames, please do correct me if I'm wrong, frames are measured from this point here down to here. So yeah, I have a 44 centimetre frame, and it was the smallest frame that Ribble do. The reason I picked that is because when I was first contemplating getting bikes, I went and sat on a few in different bike shops, and we've got talking to a guy about the fact that I'd had a back surgery and was a bit concerned about being in that position, and he said the main thing was to make sure I wasn't reaching too far forward. So when I was ordering the bike on Ribble, and if you don't know Ribble, they're a bike builder website, went for the smallest frame size, also went for the smallest stem. Handlebar stem is this bit here in between your top tube and your handlebars. So, sorry, head tube? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's your head tube. But basically this is your stem. And again, when I was ordering the bike, because I wanted to go for as small as possible, I ordered a 60mm stem. The handlebars themselves were fine. They are 38 centimetres width, I think, 38 centimetre handlebars. And I think the general rule is you measure your shoulders and get handlebars that kind of match that, so that you're not, you know, reaching out or in. So they were fine. It was just purely the length in between here and here. So we got chatting, and I said, well, what can I do about that? And she said, well, the most obvious thing would be to get a bigger bike. But naturally, as much as I would have loved to have done that, I couldn't afford that. So the next most expensive thing to do would be to extend the space in between here and here, basically with a longer handlebar stem. So we tried a few different options, and I think the one we settled for was a 110mm stem. So that is the one I've got on here now, the 110mm one, which obviously is 50mm longer than the one that I'd already got on there. So that's given me obviously a lot more reach. So I think that's probably about it. Please don't take my advice on bike sizes as gospel. I am still rubbish when it comes to knowing anything about bikes, really. I'm certainly still making it up as I go along. So I would always say the best thing to do is go and visit your local bike shop. So that's about it. If you have any comments or questions, please post them below. But yeah, hopefully that keeps a couple of my YouTube followers happy now that I've now satisfied their curiosity on my squeaky, creaky seat post problem. But yeah, as I say, if you've got any questions, please post them below and I will do my best to answer them. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.